So, and I think that you're nicely posed to look at this. And the first thing I wanted to kind of hit is coronavirus origins. And when we were looking this up, like, what do we know? So I started out with at December 30th, 2019, Ai Fen is a woman who is the head of the ER medicine. You pull up the New York Post article there at Wuhan Central Hospital. She diagnoses a patient with SARS-like viral pneumonia and talks with her colleagues. That same day, Li Wenlang, who's an ophthalmologist and one of her colleagues, then sent a message to 8 of his colleagues talking about the virus. Now, in that time, Li Wenlang was, days after, cited by the police for spreading rumors and reprimanded. So this is 12/30, so December 30th, 2019. And then the Chinese government on January 19th of the following year, 2020, finally indicates there's human-to-human transmission. The next day, Xi Jinping declares a people's war on the coronavirus. And then Li Wenlang dies on February 7th. And then one of his other colleagues, who was on the same call, in the same chat message with Li Wenlang, also dies on March 3rd. And for me, it's just, when you see these guys, and he was, 30 years old in seemingly good health. His colleague is another ophthalmologist, is 57, and both die of coronavirus. Does this at all strike you suspicious? Or is this just a natural result of a pretty brutal disease?
Yeah, well, and to give people my background in China, before I even joined the military, I spent 2 years living in Shanghai, traveling throughout China. When I was in the intelligence community, China was a focus of mine. I am a Mandarin linguist as well, and have really been traveling back and forth from China for about 15 years. And so when I first saw that China was starting to lock down cities at the Wuhan level size, and then later the entire Hubei province, and when I saw the amount of pressure that the state was bearing down to silence these doctors, I realized that something was up, because normally when we look at China, those of us in sort of the China watcher community, we don't see the government taking a massive heavy hand like this unless there's a major, major issue. They're not going to admit it, right? Think of how the Soviet government reacted to Chernobyl. At first it was, everything's fine, go on with your Victory Day parades, everything, no issues whatsoever. We can't let the West think there's any problems. And so seeing their almost opposite reaction at that point, when you're talking about later in January, that really told us that this was a problem that they had tried to squelch, they had tried to control, and that had broken out beyond what they were able to control. And therefore, the virus itself that they were dealing with was actually quite serious. Now, we've seen some indications that turns out that they may have had something running around, that they knew they had a problem as far back as November and had been trying to keep it quiet. So this doctor that you mentioned, Ai Fen, she's one of the first doctors to actually officially diagnose someone with having a SARS-like virus, because I think everybody else up to that point had been writing it off as pneumonia. And we see situations like this that there's pressure for them to do so. But she knew, and probably a lot of the other doctors knew, that whatever they were dealing with, it wasn't pneumonia, and they wanted that information to get out. She's gone missing now. Nobody can find her. Now, this other doctor, Li Wenliang, one thing to explain to everyone is he posted his messages on WeChat in a private, it's like a group chat, right? But then those were screenshotted and they were put on Chinese Twitter. Chinese Twitter is called Weibo. And on Weibo, it then went viral. He didn't necessarily intend for that to happen, but it ended up happening.
So would that be like if me and you are in a closed Facebook group and then you upload a screenshot of the conversation to Twitter?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. And
only that it then goes, it goes from that closed Facebook group to everyone, right, to the whole country. And so when you understand that in China, or anyone who understands the CCP, When they declare something to be a rumor, and if you have been formally accused of spreading rumors, right, that's not just like when Twitter says, "Oh, this is misinformation," or Facebook throws you a strike because you had some meme up there that was a joke they didn't like. No, 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 no. This is you've been declared as someone who's committed a thought crime against the party, against the revolution, against the country. Those are all synonymous to the CCP.
So
And for that, those 8 doctors were brought in. They were required to self-incriminate, to admit that they had spread rumors falsely. And this also, goes in with the playbook of communist thinking, that you have to internalize your punishment for you to receive your external atonement.
interesting. So is this like the same charge as like the Stalinist Russia charge of wrecking, like rumor mongering? Is it the
It's
same?
very similar. It's very similar. So it's what you've committed a crime against the revolution. You've committed a crime. You're accused of being a rightist. That's a word, like not like RIGHTIST. Like everyone is on the left because you're socialism, the Chinese characteristics, Communist Party. So anyone who's even accused of being on the right, therefore, has committed a crime. That's criminal. You've committed wrong think, and therefore you must atone for your crimes and your misdeeds.
Okay. Interesting. Now, a little bit more in depth on Ai Fen. So, this is again the ER doctor that initially diagnosed something like a SARS like viral pneumonia. So, then later, she goes to the Chinese media. Now, this is in March. And rather than giving, say, the Communist Party line, she just tells the truth. And she mentions this. So, she says that she immediately alerted the health services and documented exactly what she saw. She said, quote, I even grabbed the hospital respiratory department director who happened to be passing by my office. I told him that one of his patients was confirmed to be infected with this SARS-like virus. She was said that she was told by her superiors when she sounded the alarm that she was to be remain silent about this, and all disclosure about the illness was forbidden, even to her husband. So she wasn't allowed to talk to other doctors at the hospital about this. That, in fact, they told everybody in the department, all staff, not to disclose anything about the disease and to say nothing to it about anyone. She says, my mind just went blank. They weren't criticizing me for working hard. They made me feel alone, that I had ruined the future of Wuhan. I was in despair. Like, how could I refrain from discussions with my medical colleagues, knowing that I had new and significant virus had emerged? I followed my intuition as a doctor. What mistakes did I make? So she's actually given a demerit by her superiors. Like, does this strike you as weird?
No, that's exactly part and parcel of what would happen in a communist system, especially in the CCP, as it's changed and sort of reverted in many ways, almost evolved into a top-down structure under Xi Jinping since his ascension to power in 2012. What do I mean by that? So in 2003, when the original SARS outbreak came, that was just after China's ascension to the World Trade Organization. They were really starting to assert themselves on the world stage, and this was a huge stumble for them. So even the word SARS itself is an incredibly politicized topic within China, right? The country wants to do everything it can to disassociate itself with the SARS outbreak, the SARS epidemic, and move forward and show that forward-facing look. And so under Jiang Zemin, under Hu Jintao, the chairman of China, following that time, they had really instituted a system of tripwires where the medical community and the health community had taken it out of the hands of the politicians and said, look, if something like this does come up, we know that historically a lot of these new mutated diseases do come out, these viruses come out of China in certain areas. And it's something that obviously this is why that, the Wuhan Infectious Disease Institute, that Institute of Virology that everyone's talking about, the biolab that's there in Wuhan, that's the reason it exists, is to study these various viruses that go throughout the swine population, the bird population, the bat population, to watch to see if any of them look as though they may be mutating into infecting either widespread throughout their cattle or crossing over into the human population, as this one did. And so, one of the big issues then is, though, when Xi Jinping got in power, he set upon himself to create a cult of personality, one that we really haven't seen in China since the time of Chairman Mao. Usually, the Chinese leaders, the CCP leaders, are kind of technocratic, right? They like to be these sort of seen as bureaucrats and not actual political leaders like we'd see in the West, like we're used to. They don't stand for elections, obviously. But Xi Jinping didn't do that. So he's been consolidating power. He's been sacking his opponents. He's been throwing people in jail. He's been getting rid of people in the party that may pose a threat to him or any type of competition. And he set a chilling effect throughout the entire country, throughout the entire party. And so that knowing that situation was the context this was all brought into, that's why the local leaders there in Wuhan knew that they were shutting down everything that was coming out of these hospitals because they didn't want to be the ones who were blamed next for any outbreak. Interestingly enough, that's exactly what happened later, and that's why you saw Ai Fen come out and do that interview, was because the blame for all of this has been placed at the local party leader's head. They've been sacked. They've been kicked out of the party. They've been fired from their positions. And when I say that, by the way, the party is what controls the government at various levels in China. So you may have a provincial governor, but he still answers to the party secretary of that province. So the party boss of that area is essentially the political leader of that area. So those were the names that took the blame for all of this. And so the CCPs has sort of shifted their narrative into saying, hey, there were people who did the right thing, but it was these local party bosses that tried to squelch them. And now here we are, the national party, right? It's sort of like layers of the onion, where they know they can get rid of parts of it as long as they protect the whole. And that's what essentially happened with these guys. And so they've rehabilitated the doctors, and even the doctors who originally were detained were also rehabilitated for this new narrative.
Right. Right. Now, Ai Fen mentions, and I think where she gets herself in trouble is she mentions for sure she knows that she has proof of person to person transmission weeks before the Chinese government finally admits to the world on January 19th that there in fact is human to human transmission. But why wouldn't the party bosses, the local guys, because they know that they will be sacked, that they will be the fall guys. Why wouldn't they want to be on this right away?
Right, and this is already, part of the issue, right? Because we know that Taiwan had made that announcement to the WHO as early as December 31st, New Year's Eve of 2019, that this thing had human to human, and the WHO discarded it. If you go back to the WHO's tweets and their public statements from early January to mid-January, they're still saying that this thing is no threat. They're saying that it still doesn't have human to human. It's nothing to worry about. It's no big deal. And again, as I said before, it's layers of the onion. So you only want to peel back a little bit at a time. So, okay, she acknowledged that there's a virus, but they don't want to go all the way forward and acknowledge there's a virus and there's human to human, because with avian flu, for example, the major breakout that happened, the outbreak that happened, it really only affected people that had direct contact with diseased birds. And so it never really broke out into a large, widespread human to human contact as we see with this one.
Interesting. So it seems like the local guys then always sort of the fall guys for Xi Jinping. Then can he always then use them saying, "Well, no, it was just a subordinate."
Well, the problem though is that there's a lot of people inside China that are kind of starting to wake up to it, because if you remember, well, if you look at it from the perspective of Xi Jinping's cult of personality may turn around to start backfiring on him, because if he's made himself the sole face of the party, he's made himself the sole power and control of the military. That also works both ways. It's a dual-edged sword, because now you've got a situation where if he says he's the one in charge, it's very hard to blame someone other than him, because he's made himself the face of the party. Now, looking outwardly at that, you've already got the situations. I mean, keep in mind the context that we're talking about here. All the way back in December, the Hong Kong protests were still raging throughout the streets of Admiralty and Central there in Hong Kong. You've always got the Taiwan issue. That's a very strong issue between the U.S., the West, China, and Beijing. And then also you've got the issues of Tibet, of course, a long time issue. And then furthermore, you've got the issue of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, which is the northwesternmost province of China. When you think of the Silk Road, that's that Xinjiang and the Uyghurs. And they're a group that's been placed into detention centers. That information is getting out. That narrative is getting out throughout the world. You saw a lot of senators and even Nancy Pelosi, by the way, really starting to hit China over this. Ilhan Omar hit China over this, the Uyghur detention camps. And so there's a lot of pressure being put on Beijing at this point to do something about their own behavior. And on top of all that, now they have a virus outbreak.